It is our first time doing this format, but let me know. Okay, Monica B says, pour your drinks and light your joints, friends, which I mean is going to go adjacent to everything we're about to talk about. But
Yeah.
oh well. Uh, so real quick to start us off, I guess I'll let you guys know that the way that I came across Drake Nyx Vision on YouTube was because I was watching stuff about coaching and life coaching when it comes to addiction, and she covers a lot of different stuff when it comes to spiritual advice as well as addiction and whatnot. Which I like to get a little bit of both, but a lot of you know that of course you heard that, didn't you? Um, Tanya, will you take care of that? But so the first time I talked to Drake on the phone, I was telling her about when I went to some healthy food place like Trader Joe's or whatever. Yeah, I'm trying my best, with the health. And there's a guy with a shirt that said "Good vibes only," and he was going off about raise your vibration, telling people you got to raise your vibration. And he's absolutely right. He is. But it felt a little preachy, almost like a conversion thing. And while I was telling Drake here about that, I was in a scissor lift up in the sky doing construction, and I looked down and I saw Larry. And Larry was walking out of the Johnny on the spot talking about he can't see his dick anymore because his dick is shrinking faster than his gut is growing. And we all laughed and it was funny. And I told Drake, I was like, wait a second, out of these two people, who's the Buddha? Which one of these two men is actually the Buddha? The guy who's stressing out about good vibes only, or Larry who doesn't care who you are? He's like, you a goth kid? I'll buy you a drink, you know? And I thought that was the perfect way to kind of understand that darkness and light are not incompatible.
Yeah, absolutely. And as somebody said, it's both, like we want to aim for the high vibrations, but at the same time that we see that we do have our dark sides. And I have a video on like the inner rebel and how we all have this inner rebel inside of
Yes,
us. The inner rebel is still sacred. The inner
yes,
rebel still has a part to play in helping us to define our medicine and to grow in the world and our strength. It is the wound in some ways that the light gets through. And so it's so
yes.
important for us to explore those places within us.
Right. We are nothing without the rebels. I mean, look at science. Look at the breakthroughs in science. The guy who discovered DNA was blasted out of his mind on LSD. I mean, I could talk about Nikola Tesla, but you guys already know. But the rebels are the ones who changed the world. So the people who are crazy enough to think that everything is wrong are the ones who actually do.
Mhm.
Plato, the fucking greatest, one of the greatest minds of all time, Plato, he's famous for quoting, his quote was, he said, "I'm thinking, don't distract me with facts." And I love that quote because I mean, it was a fact that the Earth was the center of the universe. And or if he, let's say a nuclear fit like today, for example, a nuclear physicist is trying to think of fission or fusion from the sun, and someone says, "Hey, man, 1 plus 1 equals 2," and he might say, "Dude, don't distract me with facts because in fission, 1 plus 1 equals 0."
Mhm.
And it's relative to where you are. So it's one of those things where without even knowing it, Larry, the guy with the beer belly, is more enlightened in a way than this guy with the good vibes only t-shirt, who honestly, the guy with the t-shirt, his dark side is starting to get real fucking tense.
Yeah.
And that it's if you don't, you got to live your life like this: darkness, light, and you gotta let it expound. You gotta be honest about your darkness. But when you're like good vibes only, this starts to shake, and then the fucking rubber band will snap, and you got yourself a dark night of the soul on your hands.
Yeah, I was having a client, or I was having a session with a client last night, and in the work that I do, we see the attachment of the soul coming in right behind in the shoulder blade area. And when you've done your work, that space, when I look at it, it's bright and it's golden and it's vibrant. And when you've done that work to really open up your soul force, it casts long shadows in front of you because it's bringing to light all of the dark places. And in many ways, it's illuminating those dark places. Whereas when we haven't done that work, it's like all the shadows are behind us. We don't want to look at them. We can't even see them. And
Right.
so it's so important for us to recognize that, like, the world around us is a mirror. And
Yes.
like, and I love the work that you do because you're talking about symbolism, and we're talking about life as an oracle, and how, like, when we're judging, like that guy who's like high vibes only and mad almost that the other people around him aren't working on themselves. He's actually
Right.
casting that big shadow, but he can't see it.
He wanted people to be like him, not realizing that our archetype of Larry is actually, and Larry's not, they're the opposite. They're yin and yang, but in a very strange way, this guy is letting that black dot within his yin kind of take over when it comes to the enlightenment process. Jesus Christ said, "Come as you are."
Mhm,
Whereas I think it was Noah's dad who said, "Oh, you're gay? That's fucking gross." I'm
mhm,
paraphrasing, but I think it was something. And by the way, same guy who said being gay in the Bible was a sin is also the same guy who said if you're a chick though, it's cool. So,
mhm.
I mean, I've got it right here if you want to. But I mean, yeah. And so that's a bit of hypocrisy on the end. I'm not with the Bible, but with this good vibes only guy. And someone brought up in the comments a minute ago that good vibes only guy is equal to the cows that run away from the storm versus the buffalo who run into the storm knowing that it'll pass overhead faster and they'll be done. Whereas the cows running away from the storm are going to get exhausted. And that storm just gets closer and closer until eventually you're too tired. And then you just lay down in the storm and you're stuck there
Yeah.
with no energy.
Yeah, totally. And the work that I do in reading people's energy field, I have an ability to sense where the wound is. So when I'm getting in there, I'm like, oh, let's go into like the heart area because there's something right now that wants to come up. And sometimes people are like, I feel that, but I don't know if I'm ready to go into it. Like they can feel the
Ah,
emotions coming up and they're like, it's
right.
too painful. And yet the only way out is through. The only way to bring spacious to it and to transform it is to go into it.
Yeah.
And so, it's important, but it takes bravery
But
because, like that wound probably relates to like core childhood wounds
yeah.
that are hella painful, and we spend our
Yeah.
whole life building up ways to avoid going into those spaces.
Right.
It's hard to go back in after so much time.
So you probably don't pressure people to go too far into their darkness too quickly.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. But what you're saying reminds me of Jung, because Jung was a psychiatrist before he became what I consider a mystic, and he had
Mhm.
patients, and he would ask his patients, to help you, I need to know your fears. And they would
Mhm.
say, "Oh, I'm afraid of spiders, or I'm afraid of the dark, or I'm afraid of being alone, blah blah blah." And he would be like, "No, no, 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 no. What disturbs you?"
Yeah.
And they would be at a loss because
Mhm.
first of all, they're blocking it. And I went through the same thing with my dark night of the soul. For me, unlike you, and I respect it's different for everybody. But my
Mhm.
dark night of the soul was one, and
Yeah.
it was very very hardcore. But when I finally answered that question, like Jung would put, and it took reading a lot of Jung to get past it because I thought I was afraid of the disembodiment of my family. I thought that I was afraid of losing the routine. I thought I was, and then making excuses like, "Oh, it's best for the statistically, it's good for the children to keep together, blah blah blah." Not realizing that I was answering Jung's question by going, "Oh, I'm afraid of the dark." And then by going, but reading Jung and him having him through the book saying, "No, no, 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 no. What what truly disturbs you?" Before
Mhm.
I came to realize, fuck, I'm afraid of being alone.
Yeah.
And because being alone is a primordial fear that I
Yeah.
didn't want to admit that I was afraid of, because to admit that I was afraid to be alone means that I'm a sissy. So I didn't want I'm a construction worker. I can't be weak like that. But the moment that I was like, I am afraid of being alone, it began to dissipate
Yeah.
like a fucking mist. It went
Yeah.
away. And now I value my alone time. And Jung also said, do your work honestly and do your work alone, and the others will come to you.
Yeah.
And I mean, fuck, look, if you don't believe me, ask me. Like,
Mhm.
and so I took his advice and I didn't believe him. And I mean, I believed him, but I was like, I don't believe in myself enough.
Yeah.
So I became alone and I took those, I mean, it was 3 weeks that maybe turned into about a month of me being completely alone, and it 100% worked. I'll say 1,000% worked, because look what we're doing right now. There's fucking 66 people watching us right now. I did my work, I did it honestly, and I did it alone. And now
Yeah.
we've got 66 people here to hear about it.
Yeah.
I mean,
And it is like it's a solo journey, and that
yeah,
is the scary part. But once you go in, you turn the loneliness into the aloneness, and it's like the hermit card. It's so necessary to go into the cave, and it's like going into the womb space. We go into the darkness so that we can be reborn, but we have to go in alone. Like when we're born into the world, we're by ourselves, and when we die, we're by ourselves.
yes,
So, like that is like we find that strength to be okay, and like whatever's happening externally, it's fine because I build this relationship with myself, and I know that I have self-love, and that self-love, as it grows, it permeates everything else. But you have to be by yourself to dig that up and
right.
really cultivate that sense of being okay in here.
I don't think you can love yourself until you've been alone for long enough.
Yeah.
And I want to backtrack to the Hermit card. I don't know anything about tarot, and I'm curious about it. Tanya just recently started getting into the tarot, and she runs the TikTok or whatever. But real quick before I ask you about the tarot, I wanted to jump into not jump into, but just a quick comment on being alone in your spiritual journey and your dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
Whenever I was going through my dark night of the soul, I didn't know I was going through dark night of the soul, and I wanted someone to hold my hand or guide me through it. And
Yeah.
I thought, okay, when I read that you have to do it alone, I thought it was for the sake of cerebral hygiene, so that
Mm.
you wouldn't pick up the vibes or ideas of anyone else during the dark night of the soul. It turns out that this is either false or only partially true. I came to the startling conclusion that the reason you have to go into the spiritual awakening part of that by yourself is because that's what makes it hurt enough for
Yeah.
transformation to take place. And
Yeah.
that fucking sucks.
Yeah,
But
it really does. I was thinking about this recently because I've had so many dark nights of the soul and just like moments of like pure terror, pure fear, not wanting to be on the planet, like really wanting to end my life. And I finally was driven to the point where I like called one of those helplines because I was like, I really need somebody here. I waited for 30 fucking minutes and nobody ever answered. And I finally was like,
oh,
okay, I got to do this alone. And it reminds me, you know,
that's why me and you need to exist. And I hate to interrupt,
yeah,
but that I think this is important. Um if you feel like that, and this goes to any one of you
yeah,
guys, contact Drake or I. And I don't know if, I mean, your phone number is on your website.
yeah,
And I mean, of course, the reason the phone number is on the website is for online coaching and is for a business or whatever. But if you are in dire straits, by all means, email me, her, hit us up on Facebook. And I mean, personally, me, if it's just a phone call, that's free,
yeah,
like, just to get you through that fucking little bit, because some therapists became therapists because they went to college and their parents helped them go to college and pay for all that, and then they think they understand because they read a textbook about it. I'm not saying they don't. Some of them do. But I mean, fuck, how can you really help somebody unless you have been suicidal yourself?
Yeah.
That's why therapy, I think, is a bit loose.
Yeah.
And that's why I
Yeah.
think 5D therapy is a fucking great idea.
Yeah, yeah, and 5D therapy, which is what I do, I also like traditionally it's called soul journeying. And I have had like actual training from somebody over the course of the last 15 years, but it's all experiential. It's, like I have done hundreds and hundreds of hours of this work on myself. I have explored every nook and cranny. And so when I get into somebody else's energy field, I'm very comfortable going through all of those places. It's not textbook, it's not theoretical, it's
Right.
applied knowledge that I've been
Yes.
able to develop. And that's so important. So, just like when we go through these dark spaces of our own mind, so scary and disorienting, and like you might feel like you're not strong enough and you don't know what you're doing, and yet you make it through
Yeah.
and you start to pick up on the medicine of, okay, what did I do to get from there to the other side? I
Right.
felt transformation take place. Now, who am I through that? And then you can turn around and help others who are going through that similar circumstance.
Yes. And that's experience firsthand, which I like to call gnosis. And I'm sure everybody watching this channel is familiar with me. I mean, driving this point home, and I love the word for that because textbook education makes you have a great vocabulary, but gnosis is where you actually come to the formation of being able to help people. You know,
Mhm.
I consider my channel to be entertainment, even whenever I make a video. And Drake knows this, but you guys might not realize this. We have to choose a category: education, kids, entertainment. I forgot all of them. I always click entertainment every single time because I am not a teacher. I'm a student, and whenever you guys watch my videos, you're literally watching me think. You're watching me learn. But that's the process of gnosis. So I'm taking what has happened and what I am going through and applying it to what I have read, which is not gnosis, ironically speaking. But the textbook, I mean, I don't want to shake my head at a textbook because you can take a textbook and you can fucking neurologically figure out what happens in the brain when you're suffering, or you can look at a diagram or a chart that shows that your cortisol goes off whenever you feel stress or whatever, blah blah blah. But that book I just showed you, which is fucking roughly 900 fucking pages, all of a sudden it all of a sudden becomes nonsense whenever you are in a point of suicide or you can't stand being on earth anymore because that little diagram that I just showed you, it ain't doing nothing. You can say, oh, you have a relief, you have too much cortisol in your system. Great. I want to die. Like, it doesn't fucking work. So you have to either speak with somebody, which I realize we just said that their dark night of the soul should be experienced alone, and that is true, but that does not mean to ignore help when it's presented to you. And
Yeah.
by the way, this is us presenting it to you. The guy who wrote the foreword to my book, uh Jason Barron of Harkonnen, who has been a mentor of mine. He's an older man. He owns Salty Siren Tattoo of like three or so locations. Very wise motherfucker. He went through the same thing that I did, and he gave me advice, some of which I took, some of which I didn't, that I should have. But so that's where I want to clarify is I got in contact with Jason Barron about what I needed to know to get through my dark night of the soul. But
Mhm.
when it came down to actually going through it, I didn't have him over to hold my hand. I
Yeah.
did I did it alone, and forced myself to build and make things, and that was painful, but it made me stronger. Just like working out, doing push-ups or lifting weights is painful. You're doing the same thing with your psyche, with your mind. It's the
Yeah.
same way that meditation is like doing push-ups for the actual brain. the dark night of the soul is kind of push-ups or working out for the mind, you know?
Yeah. And I think too, like if you have not experienced anything like that, the study, the theoretical piece, what you're learning when you watch this channel, you're picking up tools that you might theoretically use in the future. So then when you get into that, you finally take the journey, things start to get really hard. You might forget some of it, but other pieces of it might rise to the surface. And
Yes.
you're pull from that. And you're like, okay, what's in my toolbox right now?
Yes.
And how do I see what works? And I might try a couple of things.
Right.
I might have to use the same thing over and over. And I once heard this analogy that was like when you're going through it, it's like a super snowy winter. And if you live on a farm, oftentimes the farmer will have a rope that goes all the way to the barn so that as everything gets whited out by the snow, they can still use that rope to get across to feed their animals. Otherwise, they'd get lost. And so
Yeah.
it's up to you to figure out what are the tools that you can use to make sure that when you're in the chaos, what can you hold on to get to the other side?
Wow. That's a beautiful analogy, and it makes me automatically think of so many things that when I thought I had nothing, I
Yeah.
actually did have particular tools, in my case, a microphone to and a camera to use in order to, well, metaphorically speaking, pull up on that rope. I couldn't help but read while I was speaking a moment ago. Someone in the comments just asked, "Can you have more than one dark night of the soul?" And I would like to turn that over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I actually just posted a video on this, and the Dark Night of the Soul is so varied. There are so many different types of people, and your soul is going to go through a very different experience than everybody else. I have been through many dark nights of the soul. I think I'm done. I think I get to the other side.
I
My
think,
life is opening up, and I'm like, everything's beautiful and great. And then I slowly kind of go back into forgetting, and
yeah,
then I have to go through the whole process again where
yes,
I have to go through this rebirth process, and
that
it's
is
so
so
fucking
100%.
painful. But
That's
what was that?
that's totally me with the spirit molecule, and
Yeah.
I haven't done the spirit molecule in months now because of a little bit of anxiety, I think. But the same way that you're saying that is like after I've done the spirit molecule, I am like, I've got this shit figured out for
Mm,
like 2 or 3 weeks.
yeah.
And I like free of, I'm talking about free of temptation, free
Yeah.
of gossip, like, and also not in a self righteous way, but in a humbling way where I'm like absorbing people better than I ever, just like one of your dark
Mm,
nights of the soul. But then it wears off, you know? And that's where you have to, I think, be the shepherd to your
yeah.
own if your
Mm,
sheep are your desires, so to speak, you have to be the shepherd, you know. And even though I did describe my dark night of the soul as being one singular thing that happened to me, and Godspeed, I hope the motherfucker sticks because so far so good. um there might come a time where I start to either gradually lose what I gained from it, or maybe, God forbid, it not God forbid, but like, but maybe it's time to step up to the next step because evolution doesn't stop. There's no
yeah,
end game.
exactly. Exactly. And that's
Oh,
that's the point with my Dark Night of the Soul that I've
right.
seen. Every Dark Night of the Soul has a different theme around it. So the
Yes.
first one was my initial awakening to the spirit realm and disconnection from society and my family. The
Right.
second one
Which
was
is
looking at
painful
like
to realize that, and I'm sorry, to realize that you have to separate yourself from people who are that dear to you as being blood is one of the hardest thing that people have to force themselves to do.
yeah.
And please continue, I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so it's like we all have to go through these journeys, It's like Siddhartha, grew up very rich and then started to see all the suffering in the world. And so had to renounce everything that he grew up around to go on this new type of journey. So that was kind of my first break. And that sent me to India and South America, where I lived for some time. Then I came home with all this knowledge. I kind of fell asleep. And then I ended up kind of taking on those characteristics of my society again. And I
Right.
was like getting married, gonna have a baby, was a relationship with the wrong person,
Right.
and me into my next big breakthrough. And then the one after that had to deal with like my health and career. And so each time I went deeper and deeper into figuring out what layers of my belief systems are
Right.
not serving me, and what do I remove so that I can be more open to what life has to offer.
Right. Did being in India okay, so when you said that, I automatically it gave me a flashback to
Mm.
C.G. Jung's well, Carl, his book Psychology of the East. I suppose this shows up backwards, doesn't it, to you?
No, not for me.
Oh, okay. For me, it's I guess it's a mirror image, so it's backwards, but it's a fucking beautifully illustrated book.
Mhm.
And I wish I could find the spot because I put a little dot by it, but I need to start using a highlighter instead. But he was saying that his visit to India pretty much was an upheaval of everything that he learned in psychology in the West. And he had this epiphanous moment that was almost a dark night of the soul, where he realized that, I don't want to say living a lie, but realizing that all this analytical psychology was futile compared to the connection with divine source that
Yeah.
before he had traveled to India was not in touch with, and no one he knew was in touch with, and it caused a great deal of loneliness and isolation on his part. uh,
Mhm.
so I do want to talk about your trips to South America with the ayahuasca, but can you tell me anything about in India? Was there anything, because I've always loved Ram Dass's trip to India led him to Maharaji,
Yeah.
and Steve Jobs traveled to India, I think, to meet the bliss permeated mother, so to speak. But they died before he got there, which I don't know if that's for the best or not. But it seems as though America or the Western civilization thinks of India. Well, I'm going to say India, and then people viewing this, I want you to think of India. That's not India. It turns out that's what they put on our TV. And India is fucking beautiful. Temples, running water, toilets, streets, streetlights. It's us, but they're connected.
Yeah,
And
and I have to say about India,
yeah,
it is dichotomy, it is paradox, it is I do think that the things that we see, what we know about India, that is true, and there's this whole
right.
other side that there's rich culture, the food is amazing. There, you can walk down one street and you can smell the poverty that is happening, and on the other side, you walk through and you smell incense and you can
Uh,
smell seasonings, and then you go to the temples and people are just so humbled to like be in those spaces and to be praying and to be working on their spiritual paths. And I've traveled to over 16 countries at this point, spent many years on the road, and India was by far the friendliest. People just wanted
my
to connect
my
arts
ego is
and
hella jealous right now, by the way.
yeah.
Please continue.
Yeah, and I think that compared to the other people I was traveling with, we were in a group of 12. It was my first time backpacking, and so they taught me how to live out of a bag, and I
Oh,
handled the paradox. Like
yeah.
I both, and I could just accept both, and I was at such peace in the chaos of it.
Right.
It activated for me. It like stimulated my creative brain,
Right.
uh, and I talk about this in the video I just posted, but when I was in India and I was meditating all the time, I started to feel my crown really opening up in this way that I had never experienced. And then towards the end, like the last month I was in India, I just couldn't stop laughing. Like it overcame me. And
Yeah.
it was all the time, laughter would just pour through me. And I mean, it was, as I said in my video, it was like a sickness. Like I just couldn't
Yeah.
stop laughing. The energy
Almost
was
like
so
almost like psychopathy. Like if you were in the West laughing like that, you'd become like mentally ill, you know?
yeah.
And that joy came from having less. And that
Yeah.
reminds me, and I had to pick it up, but like in riding the ox home, the final step is called returning to the marketplace or whatever, where
Mhm.
the person who returns to the streets has nothing. If well, his tits are out, for example, and he lives out of a bag, and he's not adorned with any garments or pearls or anything. But when he arrives, metaphorically speaking, trees and plants that are withering spring back into life because of his presence, you know. And what you're saying also reminds me of the how you would start laughing whenever I read Ram Dass's biography, being Ram Dass. He said he didn't understand what joy is until he had nothing. So
Yeah.
he would ride motorcycles. He was a thrill seeker, like a speed freak, you know. And whenever he would expedite himself to a temple where he was not allowed to have any input or any stimulation from any outside sources. Nothing. You get a little bit of rice to eat, but you just sit there all day and you have no input for anything that creates joy. He said that joy began to generate itself. The human body began to generate joy from within. And he said it came from his heart chakra, but because uh, the lack of stimulation, which is the opposite of Facebook, Instagram, and all these things, joy will come out of you if you give it a chance to. But for Ram Dass, for example, that took isolation and living out of a backpack.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a process too where sometimes again you have to go through the darkness before the joy is created. Whereas in India, I was able to access that joy and it was really beautiful. Years later, I did a 10-day sit, meditated for 10 hours a day, and it was kind of beautiful at first.
Yeah.
And then it got really dark. And for days, I was like, there's all these like demonic creatures around me, like squirting blood at me, and it was like I couldn't get away from it
This
even
is
when I
during
wasn't.
your meditations?
Yeah, yeah, because I was meditating for 100 hours in 10 days, and I was just, like, stuck in this world trying to maintain my peace and my groundedness, and I couldn't talk to anybody, so it was a silent retreat, but I could ask questions as needed to, the counselors there,
Okay.
and when I asked about it, they were like, "That's your darkness coming up," and I was
Ah,
like, "Oh, okay," and so
that's
I got.
purging.
Yeah, it's purging, exactly, and so I got serious about it and, would stay up later meditating because 'cause I'm like, I obviously have a whole lot that I need to look
So
at
you
and
didn't
to.
run away from that dark visions or hallucinations. You were like, I need to meditate more so I can get to the light at the end. Because to get to the light at the end of the tunnel, you got to go through the tunnel.
Yeah,
And that's what you did. So you didn't shy away. You didn't say, "Oh, I'm having dark hallucinations. Let's back up." You
yeah,
didn't say, "Let's put it in reverse, Terry." You fucking went into that shit.
yeah, and
And
that's
that
just like with other people and I see the darkness, like, there's not anything that scares me. There's not anything that weirds me out. Like, we're just human beings with layers of experience generationally, shit that we took on from our families.
yeah.
Like you might think, oh, like this thing that I'm ashamed of, this thing that happened, this thing I did, this is me. Well, it is a symptom. It is a response to other huge layers that are within you that we got to bring to the surface. And we can't just shove it down, like it has
Yeah.
to come up.
Right.
And I started working with somebody recently who said his therapist ghosted him, and I think it's because she didn't want to go into the dark, and so he started working with me and he was like, this is what I've been looking for, like somebody just go into the dark with me.
Damn, so the therapist shut him down because the shit got too dark. You know
Yeah,
what? That is a perfect analogy for modern science, medical fields, and therapy. Because the way that we deny those dark portions, those uncomfortable portions, is permeating all of human society, you know? Um, I'm reminded of being in construction. I had the disfortune of watching a company demolish a cathedral, a beautiful cathedral
oh,
that was being used as a hospice for people to go to die.
mhm,
And it
mm,
was replaced with a parking garage. The
mm,
parking garage was meant to get more parking for the hospital that where people were desperately trying to keep Nana alive at 93 years old, saying, "Oh, we gotta get one more fucking month out of Nana," instead of putting her in the beautiful hospice with the stained glass. I'm talking about artwork that looked like fucking Michelangelo and stained glass, fucking like
Uh,
it looked like a church from medieval times and maybe a little bit more modern, but it was a hospice. They demolished it so that they could save Nana. And in India, people, whenever they get a disease that, or in a condition that is terminal, they actually will go to a river that where they will cremate you on the spot.
yeah.
And what is incredible, and that's the same thing. Also, I read about this in Ram Dass's book. He was startled by it because people were in line to be cremated and then spread throughout the river. And while they were in line, ready to be and then cremated, they were having casual conversations.
Mm,
He realized in that moment that not it's not about these people are not only not afraid of death, but they don't even believe death exists.
yeah.
And I can't argue with that.
Yeah.
You know, India is completely different from, well, then again, maybe India is not different from the rest of the world. Maybe Western society is different from the rest of the world because I mean, you also travel to South America for the
Mhm.
ayahuasca ceremonies as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and I was there not originally for ayahuasca.
That's why I'm going.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if I go back, it's definitely happening again. But I was there to do service learning. I was there to learn Spanish, and things just weren't working out and kept leading me deeper and deeper. I didn't know that I was going to have the journey that I went on. It was 7 months, originally only going to be 3 months, and I extended it by 4 months.
Really?
And yeah, I ended up living in like a Hare Krishna eco village for some time. I hitchhiked through Bolivia and Argentina, went to a
Define
rainbow fest.
hitchhiking real quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Uh
Like literally?
oh yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
think I got sold into the sex slave trade. I had to jump out of moving vehicles. And then just like I had
That's
to
what I
hide,
was thinking when I asked you because you're like, I was hitchhiking, and I'm like, you better
yeah.
be ready to fucking throw hands.
Yeah, I was really I had no fear when I was younger, and I just like went into the world and I wanted to try everything. And over time I've become a little bit more self-aware, but it really helped me to hone in on my intuition because there were times where I'm like, "Oh, this is a really bad situation. How am I going to get myself out of it?" And then I'd have to figure it out, and it just helped me to build so much
Well, that
self-trust
practice
through
makes perfect. And you were evolving in that place and time. I mean, by putting yourself in those positions, you made yourself stronger.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
I did the same even after all those experiences. I hitchhiked through the states at one point and ended up like on the back of a motorcycle and went to the Sturgis motorcycle rally. And it's taken me to just like really fun places and helped me to meet a lot of really awesome people.
wow. So you couldn't do all that awesome, badass, cool shit without being in danger.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that makes
Exactly.
sense.
You have to have risk to grow, and I think that's
Yeah.
my comfort zone was so big, and so I didn't know what my danger zones were, and I've slowly figured that out over time, but
I think there's
grew
an 80s song called Danger Zone that will describe that to you exactly. Clear it up
absolutely.
real quick,
Yep.
though.
Yep, totally. But, over the last 15 years, I've worked a lot in outdoor education and leadership development. And my experiences getting to touch my fear zone, my edges helps me to see that in other people and help them to grow and to push those zones so that they can feel more empowered and really grow into their strength and to their expansion, because that's
Yeah.
ultimately like the human journey is all about how do you expand? How do you let yourself grow into the unknown? How do you push through the fears and allow yourself to experience the things that you've always dreamed about? Because it's
Right.
possible, but you have to remove the blocks and you have
Yeah.
to push through and know that you can trust yourself.
Those blocks are fear
Yeah.
based, I think.
Yeah.
And I want to be a mystic. I do. I read your comment, and I do apologize. Sorry, I got to throw in the joke here and there, but I respect what you wrote, and I appreciate that. Um, but so can you tell me a little bit about? I didn't say want to be mystic, by the way, to mock anyone. That was the actual name. I love the name.
Yeah.
That's what I am.
Yeah.
Uh, but, can you tell me about your visits and when you were sitting in an ayahuasca ceremony, and you
Mhm.
said that there was quite the mixture of light and dark that took place. It wasn't all rainbows and unicorns.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done 9 ceremonies now, at 3 different locations, a mixture of, indigenous practitioners and Western practitioners. So I've just seen this, like, pretty big spread, and to go down this path, this would be a really long story to really go into it all the way, but yeah, man, like when you're working with the medicine, there is the energy of the medicine herself, like the
Yes.
grandmother Aya, she has teachings and lessons and will take you where you need to go. And at the same time, you have to be very careful about who's serving it, who brewed it. I actually ended up I did 6 of my first sessions with like normal ayahuasca, and my 7th ceremony,
Oh, you so
man.
you actually drank the ayahuasca.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Okay. I didn't know that. I thought you
yeah.
were sitting in as a student. I thought you were learning about it.
Yep. Well, you have to dive into it to
Th
learn. They
Hypnosis, right.
yeah, yep. They and when
Okay.
I started working with my mentor down there, she was like, "We just want to jumpstart you." So I did 3 days in a row. The third day, we also did what's it called? It's the cactus, not peyote. And it's been a while, like
Peyote
15.
is a cactus.
It is, but it's the other one. Anybody know what it is? Anyway, so I San Pedro. So I had
Right.
San Pedro, and then did the ayahuasca again that night. We did a sweat lodge that day too, and I was just like so tired. It was a lot all in one day. So that was my fourth ceremony. Again, there's just I could break this down in so many ways, but that last ceremony, I drank it and I was like, what is this? This isn't what we had before. Granted, it took me many hours before I could ask that because I was screaming. I had like sucked in all of the energy in the room and like nobody else was experiencing anything. And they took me outside and I couldn't tell if people were speaking English or Spanish or Quechua. And I kept being transported to this woman's like scary looking house. And so I was like, I was actually going somewhere else. And then I'd come back to my body and I'd be screaming out in pain. They eventually put me inside and I like sang for hours and that helped to lift it. But
Okay.
when I would ask, I was like, what was different about that brew? And the main lady training me, she was like, nothing was different. And I'm like, no, no, it was different.
Did
And
it
when
taste
she,
different?
yeah, it tasted different, it went down different. Everything about it was different. And so afterwards, she asked her husband, who was the Peruvian shaman there, and he was like, oh, yeah, that was black ayahuasca. That was ayahuasca of the underworld.
Oh, the black ayahuasca.
Yeah, so that's a thing. Like there's more than just your typical brew. There's some that are brewed for other types of purposes to take you a little bit deeper, a little bit darker. Yep,
Yeah.
San Pedro.
So I know. Please continue. I saw the question and I couldn't help but address it. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
they asked
But
if but the
true.
synchronicity thing is it doesn't quite fit what we're talking about, but I do like to touch upon some of those things sometimes. But you did 6 ayahuasca sessions?
At that point, yeah, I had already done 6, and it was the 7th one where it got really dark. And I'm actually going to put out a video on this soon because it's a long story. But
Please do.
I took on a curse. And again, it requires a whole video on this because I need to break it down and tell you all about like all of the things that it'll take me a long time. But you got to be careful. You can't just,
Yeah.
like if medicine is offered to you, be really really discerning about who you work with
Right.
and the environment, what your intention is.
Right.
I often in with intentions, and I think it was actually that session where it got really dark. My intention was that I had a bunch of people who actually had addictions in my life. And I was like, I want to help these people who have addictions. And
Right.
so oftentimes through my ceremonies, I was actually working on other people. And after that ceremony, within the days that followed, I had multiple people reach out who had addictions or experiences with addictions. And they were like, I don't know what you did, but I felt your energy and something shifted. And I woke up and I don't have the same craving. And like, I don't feel like who I did yesterday. And so something happened in those ceremonies that I shifted the energy, not for myself or not only for myself, but for these other people in my
Okay,
life.
so despite you having a dark experience, you might have been absorbing what other people needed to be vacuumed, so to speak, out of their system. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a burden, a blessing, and a curse,
Yeah.
you know? And call me whatever. I kind of felt that energy whenever I spoke with you on the phone a little
Yeah.
bit, about doing this talk right, right here, and I was immediately like, because when I first wanted to do a podcast, it was YouTuber to YouTuber, but as I spoke to you, I was like, I want to tell her everything about my alcoholism and about my addiction, and I would like to, I mean, not only just to get it off my chest and to get your perspective. Truth isn't who wanna be mystic. Thank you very much for your donation. Fucking we appreciate it. Uh but I'm not shy. I've noticed that the less shy I am about my addictions, the better I feel about it, because when it's hidden, it's exacerbated. And I've noticed that I've had an easier time dealing with my cravings, which are constant and daily,
Mhm.
whenever I get on here and tell people about it, and then they respond. And some people say I feel exactly the same way. Some people say I got through it this way. And then there's people who say I'm in it now and it's bad. And so it's this equilibrium of people asking for help and also me taking help from others. And it's a
Mhm.
cycle. And I think it's beautiful. Whereas if I got on here and pretended like I was not an addict, none of that would have occurred.
Yeah.
And my honesty about my addiction is helping it, I think, quite a bit, you know. But as far as ayahuasca goes, I can't get down there yet, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, the last sessions that I did, the last ceremonies I did were here just outside of Portland. I did two. So it came to me, which was really nice.
Really.
And yeah, it's actually becoming a lot more common in this
Well, I
area.
live in Missouri where it's illegal to carry a black marker. So, I mean, we just got weed recently, which is great, but that doesn't necessarily help me
Yeah.
because,
Yeah, we
I
did this with,
wondered,
like, slinging mushrooms over here now. I
yeah,
think the one got shut down, but they were on a roll for a little bit, just selling mushrooms, and we're
they got
working on
shut
compliance.
down.
But yeah, it's not legal to just, sell out of a storefront
Oh,
as
I
of
see.
yet.
Okay, it should be, but maybe they should start out with guided sessions or whatever. But
Yeah, yep, and that's what they're working on, and so it's really interesting to see that, it's not the whole, country, but we have these little pockets where they're starting to explore what does alternative therapy
right. By the way, just
for this work to happen.
right. It's funny that we use the term alternative therapy. The
Yeah.
therapy that we have now is the new. It's brand new, and it's a blink of eye. It's going away quick. Alternative therapy has been therapy for tens of thousands of years. The bullshit that we get out of textbooks right now, that you go whenever you use your insurance card and you go get therapy, that's boop on the map, and it's a blink of an eye. It came in real quick, and then it's going out just as quick because of people like you. And thank God, because I'm going to tell you what, it goes nowhere. And because they want to talk to you about your problems in the fashion that they talk about taxes and jobs, and there's no core, how should I say, the phrase "no mud, no lotus" comes to mind. They don't understand the seed of the disturbances that cause addiction. As Russell Brand said, uh, addiction is a disease. It's not because they did the drug that caused them to be addicted. It's because they didn't have a choice. It was either leave this life or augment it a little bit right now to make it different enough, long enough to get to the next phase.
Yeah.
And he didn't say that exactly. I'm paraphrasing. I think he said trauma is the gateway. That's what he said. Weed's not a gateway drug. Trauma is the gateway drug.
Trauma.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that's why, like, when we're working on dealing with trauma or with addiction, with helping to evolve it, to lessen its grip, it's so important that we do that trauma work. Like, and as we do that, because we were talking about this on the phone the other day about what does it look like to slowly build that relationship where you can release the grip. It takes time, and we have to celebrate our
Time.
small wins along the way, where it's like, like 15 years ago, or a little bit longer, like I was drinking every day, and I'd wake up in the morning, start drinking, and weeks would pass, months would pass, and I was doing a bunch of drugs at the same time, and like there was just no stopping. And I was like, okay, how do I hit the brakes on this? And
Right.
that's when I started healing work. And now I can see, like 3 years ago I was still smoking cigarettes, and like the cigarettes are out. I
Right.
was still drinking, not too long ago, and I'm slowly like, now maybe I have one drink, maybe sometimes I fuck up and I drink more than I want to, and I'm like, okay, we got to start over today, but it's still better than it was last year,
Yeah.
it's still better than before that.
Yes.
I'm making.
Yeah. I mean, I could not agree more. Um, I'm sober right now. The time will come that I have a beer. I have this vape. I've been not hitting it so far. That is a light form of addiction, but and it reminds me of realizing that we're on our own when it comes to addiction. AA seemed to be a form of relapse postponed so that you can come back to AA and thus continue making money the same way that the medical. Well, okay, I'll tell you this, and let me know what you think of this. What got me addicted to opiates in the first place, and by the way, just anyone watching this, I don't consume any opiates currently. I do have a little kratom from time to time, which is a fucking leaf, and so don't get me wrong, I dabble, but it's like she said, a lot better than yesterday. But what got me addicted to opiates for 10 fucking years was I was doing MMA with somebody, not in an official setting, but kind of like in a fight club type setting, and they kicked me in the knee. My knee went in backwards, and then I went to Lincoln County Hospital where they said your knee's fine, you're good to go to work on Monday. And then I couldn't because my everything was torn to shreds, and I, to the life of me, can't understand how that hospital is still in business. But I went to an actual hospital in St. Peter's where they found the torn ligaments, the torn muscles, and everything that showed up on the x rays. Nevertheless, they prescribed me 7 tramadol a day. And it started out as 4, by the way. But when I got used to that, that was their answer. I got used to 4 tramadol a day and they upped it to 6, and then they upped it to 7. And then they took it away all at once, and I had no choice but to get what I needed elsewhere. They took it away after like 5 years, by the way. Waited
Wow.
until I don't wanna say on purpose, but really seems like it. Maybe the
Mhm.
doctor was oblivious, maybe he was ignorant, but they got me hooked on opiates through tramadol, and then I had no choice but to continue getting it. And thank God for what I'll call cubensis. And some people might not know what that means, but you can look it up and find. We can't say certain things on cubensis. And 5 grams in silent darkness freed me from tramadol. But I do want to add that much like the Dark Night of the Soul, it was the it was one of the scariest 6 hours of my entire life, but
Yeah.
I did sit with it the whole time, and it set me free from tramadol.
Yeah.
It felt like it rewired my brain. Not only did it
Mhm.
feel like it, but it was 6 grams. So I know they recommend 5 grams, 5 grams in silent darkness. I think Terrence McKenna, but I could feel them, if you know what I'm saying, them rewiring the things, finding the pathways, and then showing me those pathways and how to break the cycle of addiction. And I'm going to tell you what, if I didn't believe in miracles before, after that I did. I was like,
Yeah.
Bible, spirits, uh, astrology. I was like, I'm on board, whatever it is, because I witnessed a miracle the next day when I forgot that I had the medication. The same medication that I couldn't get through a day without. It was about 6 o'clock the next day, the evening, that I was still reeling about this experience I had last night from the cubensis. But I was like, "Well, I forgot to take my medicine. Oh my God, I forgot to take my medicine." And it was so exciting that,
Mhm.
and I'll never go back. I'll never go backwards. Now,
Yeah.
by the way, so not to be a hypocrite, I admit it didn't cure me. I'm still addicted. It's in me. It's fucking in my bones, and I feel the craving all my life. And Robert Downey Jr. is he said in an interview one time, "When you see me on the TV, you're not watching a man acting. You're watching a man not doing drugs on purpose." Not
Mhm.
many people understand that, but
Mhm.
when you're there, you do understand it, because for me personally, and for Robert Downey, who had the balls to say this, for me, not doing drugs is an activity. It's a hobby. To not do drugs and not to drink alcohol is something I have to do manually. And
Yeah.
it doesn't, I mean, I would love to understand how a human body functions without that, but I've never experienced it in my entire life, even when I was a child, and I don't want to get too far fucking into it or whatever, but I mean, if someone hears this and it connects with them, I think it's worth it for you guys to invade my privacy. And and the things that you have told me have helped me, I mean, so much with that. And it's just a little what you've taught me, this conversation, what we talked about on the phone, not to mention, for the most part, also your channel has been a piece of the puzzle in the path of my sobriety that someday will lead to me not having cravings. I just
Yeah.
don't see that light at the end of the tunnel yet.
Yeah, but you can see that you've done progress.
Progress.
You've done the work, and
Right.
and I've been thinking a lot about like what are kind of like the facets of like what help us to move past, move beyond, evolve past our addictions. And there's like there's the inner work, which is so crucial. It's your starting point, it's your foundation. It's putting together a dream for your life and envisioning what is possible for yourself. And for a lot of people, they're like, I have no idea what I want out of the future. But that's
Yes.
the work
That's
we get when we
important.
start. Yeah, and but you have to, you have to not only look at your traumas, but your beliefs. Whose beliefs did you take on? Why? And once you remove that, then you can start to see like, oh, I actually have these like desires for this type of life, for this type of experience, for this type of creation. And then you start dreaming it and building a foundation towards that direction. And then the other piece of it is community, and making sure that you have supportive people around you
Yeah.
who are also on themselves,
Yeah.
who are also struggling with these questions and doing the inner work so that you have somebody to bounce off your inner journey with, because that helps to build strength
Yeah.
as you make your way forward.
100% correct. And I was fortunate enough to have shout out to Michael McGee, who invited me to what he called sober parties. And
Mhm.
despite him being a drinker, and Jason Barron of Harkonnen, who basically walked me through his experiences in such a way that I didn't have to repeat what he did, even though I did. And the community thing is very important. And then you made a point that was right before that one that I wanted to connect with, but the community thing took over or whatever. But the community thing is probably the hardest part.
Yeah.
because you'd be surprised how many people don't want to put down their egos for long enough to accommodate somebody else's. I don't want to say struggle because that makes me feel like a burden. I'd rather just stay inside. I
Yeah.
would rather sit inside this house and fucking delve into these puppies than have anybody feel obligated not to drink around because that's awkward as fuck, you know? And but whenever you have someone step up and say something like that, I'm having a barbecue, I'm having a sober barbecue, and
Mhm.
they it's not about you.
Yeah.
They're like, it's sober October. I'm having a sober barbecue. You're invited to this shit, and and it means so fucking much. So even if you don't have that, if you're struggling and you're an addict and you don't have that in your life, maybe that's a sign that you are supposed to be that person for
Mhm.
somebody else,
Yeah.
to have that sober barbecue.
Too, like, we have our personal and we have our interpersonal, but we have to think of systemically how do we create these spaces too. And I love seeing that here in Portland where there's new bars that are
Yeah.
sober bars, and
Yeah.
there's more and more places where there is no alcohol and you just drink kombucha or a cool mocktail. And it's just like normalizing that that is even possible so that we can create events around these spaces.
Right. Shout out to
Oh, I think I just lost you. I can't hear you.
there for a moment, could you? I got a phone call. So,
Oh,
can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Now, oh, it fucked up the whole thing. So, so I have a bit of an appointment that I said that I told him this podcast would go about 40 to 45 minutes. We're going on 61 minutes, but we covered quite a bit, and my face is frozen on here, isn't it?
No, you're it's just a black screen
It's
where I am.
black. All right.
Yeah,
I'll take that as a sign. We did a solid hour, and
yeah.
by all means, if I'm lucky enough, perhaps you will join me again.
Absolutely. We have so much to talk about, and I'm also excited about doing a session with you. We talked about maybe doing that online, so
Yes.
we'll see.
Uh,
We'll see what.
yeah. So everybody listening, we she does what she does with 5D coaching is I'm going to actually have a verbatim session with her, not as an example as a client, but literally as her client, and to give you an idea of what she does in real life. And I also want to I would like to tell all 96 of you to subscribe to her page because she fucking deserves it.
Thanks.
All right, and on that note, I think I'll leave it there, and I appreciate your time very much, Drake.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for everybody who has been here watching.
Yep. All right, cool. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Talk to you later.
All right, bye.
Bye.